Hello, everybody, and welcome in as we're joining you live from Dallas, Texas. Again, from my home office, as we're happy to have you along for the ride. A lot, and I mean a lot, to talk on this evening. NVTV, we're live on all of our platforms. That's YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. Like I said, a lot to discuss, a lot to touch on for tonight. We're covering Arcitys, his recently made comments about the Chicago Huntsman. What team will, in fact, capture their second CDL championship first? We'll also later in the show be joined by Maven to talk on the Chicago home series, his current frontrunners for MVP, as well as his thoughts on the future of OGLA. All that and more ahead on Off the Break. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Off the Break, presented by Jack the Box. I'm Lando Sanders. I wish I, again, was in the Frontier Communications studios, but I am, in fact, spending another event in the home office. This is where I intend to be for the Chicago home series going on this weekend. It should be a fantastic event, but like I said, wish that I can enjoy it. Wish that I could join you from a little more of a professional setting. You know, we got the bookshelf. We're just trying to hang out, have a good time, talk some COD. But regardless, wish that I could be in the lovely Victory Park area. But unfortunately, not for now. However, I feel like things are just right around the corner, as I say every episode. But I'm starting to feel that way. I absolutely am. I want to give a huge and very special thank you to all the folks that are listening to Off the Break right now, as well as in the future, right on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. A very special thank you to everybody who is listening to us there. If you haven't done so already, make sure to check out Off the Break on all podcast platforms in case you ever miss an episode. You know, I watch a lot of content leading into events. I always make sure I'm on top of just about every single story that's available. I'm trying to watch every piece of content that I can, especially ahead of CDL events. Chicago being a big event, I managed to catch a very interesting interview that the Call of Duty League did with Arcitys. This interview that was done on the Trip Cap podcast really surprised me. You know, it surprised me because it was the truth, right? You could tell that throughout the entire discussion that Arcitys was frustrated. He almost seemed like he was venting, right? And he also confirmed everything that I thought was happening with the Huntsman. Last week, I discussed that this roster, it doesn't feel like a team, right? It feels like a group of players. It doesn't feel as if this is a fully functioning, ready to go lineup. It doesn't feel that way. And I've said since the moment this roster formed, a lot of personalities, right? You get a lot of guys that want to talk, a lot of guys that want to be the leader, a lot of guys who want to be in the spotlight. I mean, pretty much every single one of them, a history of communicating, a history of calling, right? This has been a continuous talking point ever since this roster was formed. These are the things that we talked about. Now, a few quotes from Arcitys throughout the entire interview. I want to go and read a few of these word for word. These are directly from Arcitys. These are not my own. These are from him in that particular podcast. So these are a few. We don't know how to play the game. Right? That was one quote. We knew this because he tweeted it on Twitter. He confirmed it again in this interview, pretty much went a little bit more in depth. Along with that, another quote, we have a lot of bickering. There's a lot of us not listening to each other. Another quote, us five shouldn't be losing. Our roster is held to a higher standard. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? And the final quote that really bothered me. And it really did, because I'll be honest, for a second, I had to get up after this. I had to pause the interview. I had to get up and just pretty much get a little bit of time away from what he says. Lastly, he said, this is Arcitys. He said that they are having issues with players not waking up on time before scrims. He later went on to say that formal and gunless don't wake up on time. So I thought I'd go ahead and take it upon myself to be their alarm clock for them. Hey, Chicago, wake up. Wake up, because you have got company coming over. You've got some pretty interesting company coming over very, very soon. Who is it? Oh, that's right. It's the Atlanta phase. In fact, you'll be seeing them in the second round of your group, most likely. You know, the team that the entire Call of Duty scene has been waiting for you to face off against. Yeah, the roster that if you met up with based on the last two events, that you probably would have gotten smoked by. I mean, wake up. This is ridiculous. I mean, I was listening to this entire interview. I was first of all shocked that he was talking about it, but I was shocked to actually hear that this stuff is really happening with this particular group. I mean, really, this is expected with the younger teams. I get it, right? The rosters, and I really don't get it, but it would be more understanding if it was from rosters that get, I mean, that are kind of more younger, right? Players that maybe aren't in the same position as these guys are. Not only is that an insult to your team, not Arcitys, but the act of not showing up for scrimmages, to sleep, right? To be not even awake for scrimmages, to show up late for scrimmages. Not only is that an insult to your team, it is an insult to Call of Duty esports. And this isn't just a Chicago Huntsman problem. Let me just be very clear. Sadly, Call of Duty has this lack of dedication problem. It's existed for a while, and it's sad. It really is. It is sad that this occurs. And sadly, I don't know exactly when this originated, but as we all know, it's going to hold teams back. And apparently, it could and it has held Chicago back. The laziness of not working on S&D, as Arcitys stated, not working on S&D until recently, it's only going to get you so far, right? This is why the amateur scene is knocking on the door, right? We've talked about this a little bit here and there. I had the opportunity of casting the Challengers Cup last week. Saw a lot of very talented players, and I'll eventually have a few times where we kind of go in detail and talk more about it. But just in general, I mean, there are so many talented younger players that exist out there, and actually have been in the amateur atmosphere for a while now, right? Not just because there's a lot of amateur players, but because these amateur players are now starting, if they haven't already, but they're now more than ever starting to outwork professional players. They are putting in more time than pros, and that's why players are looking, rather young players are looking like the best team, the best players in the CDL. Atlanta FaZe, a group filled with young talent, and they're one of the most mature teams in the entire league. It would be totally understandable if the biggest problem that this team had was their ability to communicate with each other. That's not a problem with them. It's not a problem with a lot of amateur players. It is a problem with teams that have been, or rather players that have been around for a while. It's ridiculous. It really is. And this needs to stop. It really does. Someone needs to call them out, and I'm happy to do it because this is crazy. The fact that one of the best teams in the world is having this issue. And I'm not speculating on anything. This is a quote from Arcitys. I would not dive into a subject like this if I didn't know that it was a fact. And I'm taking it as a fact from a player who talked about it in an interview. Another quote that Arcitys brought up, as short as it may be, it is arguably the most impactful. That quote being, "We have to win Chicago." You hear that? We have to win Chicago. This is what I mentioned a week ago on Off the Break. The thing about this particular moment is interesting because not that it sounds, in any ways desperate, but in the way that if you go back and listen to that interview, it is telling because it is almost as if Arcitys is kind of realizing what is currently taking place. The fact that they've lost multiple events in a row, right? And we've kind of talked about this last week as I'm bringing it up. What happens, right? We've thought about all of these different things. We've thought about, okay, Chicago coming into their own home series. How's this going to work? Can they win? But wait a moment. What happens if Chicago loses to FaZe, right? They're going to match up most likely in round 2. That's the way that many people have their predictions going right now. What happens if Chicago loses to Atlanta? What happens if FaZe wins the Chicago home series? And many people will say, oh, it's just another online event. It's different, though. It's different when it comes to Chicago, even though we're not in Chicago. We're online, obviously. Everyone knows that. But nonetheless, this still has some depth to it. This still has a feeling. If there were to be any online event that mattered for the team that it represents, it would more or less be the Chicago Huntsman. Considering the fan base, considering the way that this team works, this is the one that really matters to them. And the worst thing possible would be for your rival in some ways. Obviously, it's kind of Dallas. It's kind of the Chicago duels that we've seen, regardless, though, just in general. It would be the worst thing possible for them to lose to Atlanta, and then for Atlanta to pretty much win the event that has Chicago's name written on it. I don't know. It's interesting, and it's something that I think a lot of people aren't preparing for, because we're actually going to see this matchup most likely happen this weekend. We're going to see this matchup happen. Like I said, a team that currently doesn't seem that they're happy with each other. A team that loses to FaZe, the biggest storyline of the season. What happens if they lose their own homestand? I've used this example for a while, and listeners of Off the Break know it well. The Chicago Huntsman have a crack in the windshield, right? As minor as these little issues may be, right? The little crack that began long ago, right? Maybe one particular word that was said, maybe a scrimmage that didn't go well, a series that didn't go well, an event loss that didn't go their way. As minor as these issues may be, the Game 5 Round 11 with Toronto, right? The reverse sweep that they have happen versus Florida, losing 3-1 last event to Florida, tweets, comments, now interviews. The crack, little by little, has started to spread. And it's clear, right? I mean, in this interview, this is a frustrated Arcitys. And it's interesting because not often do we get this kind of insight, and props to the Trip Cap podcast for having this interview occur. But the big thing for me is that all these little things that have happened over time, the biggest one is right around the corner, right? A loss to FaZe while things are currently fragile. What happens then? Right? As much as people want to act like an online home series, like I said, doesn't mean a lot for the home team. It still means a lot for Chicago. They want to win this, and they want to beat when it comes down to the opponents they have on the other side, right? You don't want to lose to FaZe, and you especially don't want to lose to Dallas, because they very well could face off against both of these teams this weekend. It wouldn't be uncharacteristic for that to take place, and odds say they'll be facing off against both teams. If Dallas comes out in the first seed, they play them in, what would it be, the bracket round 1. If Chicago ends up losing to Atlanta, they're guaranteed to play Dallas after that. I've been worried about Chicago ever since they formed. If you followed my programming throughout the CDL so far, I have been saying it. I am worried about this team. I'm worried about the personalities that exist on this team. I've said it. I don't think that they'll last until the very end of the year. And I'm worried coming into this event, because if they look the same, something's going to happen. I mean, if they look the exact same as they have the past 2 events, and granted, they've only lost to Florida. They've beaten some top caliber teams. You got to give them props for that, right? Beating Minnesota and back-to-back events. Got to give them props for that. But they better be practiced, and they better be looking top tier when it comes down to this event, because they haven't looked the same since London. You've got a solid, and speaking of London, a solid Ravens team in your group. You've got a much better looking, at least in terms of scrims, New York team now with Mac in your group. And you've got the Atlanta FaZe, the best team in the Call of Duty League. A lot is going to be on the line for this group when it comes down to Chicago. And I'm not saying that we're going to see some major change happen, but like I said, it's the little things, right? The little things that are over time equaling out to a major result. And this is not the greatest time for this event to happen. Let's be real here. This is not the greatest time considering the way that they've looked. This is not a perfect moment for Chicago coming in to their homestand. It's going to be a big event, some very top caliber rosters, and it's not going to be a fun or easy event in either of the series that they're going to play when it comes down to this weekend. A lot of top teams to match up against. And I'll tell you what, the Arcitys interview really started to open my eyes to say, you know what? It's kind of true. It is. It's very much true. A lot of things that we've been saying here on Off the Break, it looks as if Arcitys is kind of coinciding with that, right? That the fact that they shouldn't be losing. They are a team that it should be held to a higher standard considering the roster that they have. A lot of things to think about. Let's go ahead and transfer things. I believe we do, in fact, have our interview ready to go. So let's go ahead and hop into that one. We make way for Call of Duty's own CDL commentator, Maven. Clint, how's life these days, buddy?
Life is good. It's weird to say that because I know, God, there are a lot of people in the world struggling right now with everything going on. But for me personally, I've been able to stream a lot. The quarantine, everything going on, like a lot of what I do is from home. The CDL broadcasts have transitioned to online, so it's weird to say with how crazy everything is right now. But for me, for the most part, life is good.
How's Copper been handling all the attention now that you've been home all
Yeah.
the time?
It's been great. It's been great. There's some parks we can go to with him that aren't packed with people, and some
There you
trails we can
go.
take him to. So he's still getting plenty of exercise, and with less travel for me, yeah, I've been able to spend a lot more time with him, which is great. I'm sure he loves that, and it's nice because you've seen videos. He was a psychopath for probably the first year and a half after we got him, but he started to mellow out a little bit, which is good because with everything going on right now, he's been in the house a lot more, and I've spent a lot more time with him. But he's amazing. He's probably the best thing in my life. I love him to death.
Have you had to take any precautions during the cast now that you're kind of at home? Is there any, I don't know, like any closed doors, anything you have to put in the way just to make sure
Well,
he's not affecting things too much?
it's like he knows when we're going live because he's big enough that he can jump up, and we have like the regular door handles. It's not like a knob; it's just the handle you can
Right.
push down. It's like he can open doors. So I'll have to like lock the door. But then if I lock the door, there were a couple times during broadcast you hear him like clawing at the door, and it
Right.
sounds insane. So we basically take his kennel and we put it in front of the door into my little office room here, so he can't get in. But that's basically the only precautions. Audio wise, if he's going crazy and howling in the background, there's not a lot I can do. It got picked up a couple times during the finals of the last home series, but I think everybody gets a kick out of it, so it's not too big of a deal.
No, definitely not. It's always good. It's kind of reassuring to hear like, okay, Copper's listening. He's just right around the
Yeah,
corner, man.
no,
You know,
he's nuts.
much like what we've kind of seen in regular sports right now with kind of throwback games, people always kind of watching and kind of, experiencing old NFL, old NBA game stuff like that. I personally have kind of gone back when it comes down to Call of Duty and started to kind of watch old Ghost and Black Ops 2 series, stuff like that. And that was kind of right around the time that you started commentating. And
Yeah,
something, whenever I went back and started watching those series, something that I really took note of is kind of the difference in styles that casts had then compared to now. And is there anything that you can kind of speak toward when it comes in a Call of Duty commentary and how it's kind of started to evolve over the years?
yeah, I think for the most part, it's just gotten a lot better, and there's a lot of reasons for that. If you look back then, a lot of times whether it was champs or a big event, except for like a main pair, like there were a lot of people being thrown together. You weren't getting a lot of time with people. Whereas, if you think about me with Mr. X or me with Jack or me with Merc, like a lot of times to work with one person where you just get to evolve and improve as commentators with which where I remember my first MLG events, like they were just cycling, right? You'd have one commentary partner for one match, another
Sure.
for another, and that's difficult. And it would put you in pairings where some people have natural strengths, like a natural like play-by-play or a natural color. And yeah, I've watched some clips. I saw one the other day where I was casting with Bryce Tacular, and Bryce and I are both more naturally the lead, the play-by-play guy, and it was horrific. Like we were just both kind of shouting over each other. It was just play-by-play on top of play-by-play, and I think a lot of the casting back then was that. Like there weren't natural fits. Not that you have to, because I think Gandhi and I were pretty unconventional. Miles and Momo are. Jack and I were a little unconventional as well. But you don't have to have that natural thing to it. But I think it has kind of evolved into it. Like I think when I look at myself and Joe, for instance, like you have me, who's kind of the vocal play-by-play, leads the narrative, talks about storylines, and then Joe is your former pro, like your Romo, that really kind of fits into that. And also another part of it, which is huge, which a lot of people don't realize. I've spoken to this before, but now our full-time job is just commentary. Like we do shows and stuff as well. But when I first started, I was working on MLG.TV full time 9 to 5, bringing people in to stream on that platform while also trying to commentate weekends when I could travel. When I joined ESL, I was a creative producer doing a lot of stuff as well on top of the commentary. So it's like you'd have this 9 to 5 and then you'd also commentate. Now our entire focus goes into shows, narrative storytelling, and basically commentary. So there's a lot more focus into it, which I think has allowed a lot of people to improve when your sole responsibility is to commentate and you don't have a million other things on your plate. Like when I think back to Puckett, like Puckett at the beginning had so many responsibilities and he was trying to do a lot of other stuff, wanted to be a producer, wanted to commentate. But
Sure.
I've always thought like just focus on your craft, focus on being the best that you can be. I think we've gotten to a spot where there's a lot more of that. It's improved as a result.
Now, I'm glad that you kind of brought it up in a short spurt there, talking on Merck, because I often kind of compare the way that you and Merck cast is kind of like that Jim Nance and Tony Romo combo.
Yeah.
Do you look at a cast like with Merck almost and kind of compare it to other sportscasters out there, the way that they do things?
A little bit. Like I've always thought we don't really need to fit into that mold, just because we aren't appealing to the general public in the sense of like our demographics very different. Like we are appealing to young people for the most part. Whereas if you are the NFL, you need to not only appeal to a 12-year-old, but you also need to appeal to a 65-year-old. It's
Sure.
just very, very different what you need to appeal to. So can we be more loose, have more fun? And is there a little bit more of a blur between the lines between your play-by-play and your color commentator? Yeah, absolutely. But they've been doing it for a long time. There are definitely some
Right.
values that you can take from some of these, perennial kind of all-star commentators that have done it forever and ever. But yes, I can't help but compare because there are a lot of sports commentators that I don't like, that I just think are very, very general, bland, and boring. And I think they kind of have to be that way, be very safe, just due to the number of people watching, the different amount of people watching, the rules within their landscape that they have. But
Sure.
there are still some, yes, that I think I compare us to, and yeah, you sort of strive to do some of the things that they do well. Yeah.
What do you think is your favorite call you've ever made on a cast? Obviously, a lot of time during there, but favorite call? Is anything come to mind?
Yeah, I've been asked this a lot in the past, and the one I always kind of default to, and this is because of I think the additional responsibilities that I had at the time, but back with Black Ops 3, when Mr. X and I were creative producers, we were there with Jack and Revan. We were kind of the core four, and we just did a lot that year. When you think about it compared to now, in the sense of we helped with league ops, we helped with setting up the point system. We were involved in so much like meetings at Treyarch to go back and forth on updates to the game, which Joe handled a lot more than I did. But there were so many other things that we did. And then when you think about the commentary, like now in a weekend, I'll have to commentate like I don't know, four matches or so, maybe six at the high end. Back then, every single day for like 4 days a week, we were doing 4 to 5, and it was 10 to 12
Right.
hours straight with all the online delays and everything. And it was just a grind. It was a long year. It was a good year, but it was a long year. And I just remember after that champs call, that champs final, just a sense of like pride and relief and everything that was done was pretty monumental for me. The other one that really sticks out is the Infinite Warfare final for a couple of reasons. One, just the environment. Optic got
Oh
there for
yeah.
when I think
Right.
we know how big and important that was for the scene at the time. And then the other thing, which a lot of people don't know, there was sort of a weird transition period going on there where I had decided that I no longer wanted to full time commentate with Mr. X, that I wanted to move on and work with Courage because I just sort of this is before Courage was big, and I think I really saw the potential with him, and I think we can all agree now. Wasn't wrong on that. Is
It worked
he
out
has
pretty well, right?
exploded?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just knew what he was capable of, and I thought he was one of the more talented people I've ever seen behind a camera. But there was this weird period because Matt wanted to do the final still, and Jack wanted to do it, and we were like, what the hell are we going to do to please everybody and not piss somebody off? So we decided to go with a TriCast for that, and to anyone that's never done it before, it's different. It's very, very different when it's not
Right.
just two people going back and forth. And we'd never really done it before. It's something that's difficult to rehearse. It basically came down to sort of like tapping other people, or they would kind of tap their chest when they wanted to talk. And it's different, but we nailed it. I think it was a really, really good cast considering we'd never done a TriCast before. And it's just an important moment for me thinking about kind of an end of an era with me and Matt, and then moving on with Jack and the Optic win. Yeah, that's just one that'll always stick with me. And then Jack nailed the call. It's one of the more famous calls probably in the history of Call of Duty when he
Sure.
has his little kind of speech he does at the end to hype up Optic because they get the win. And it was special to me because at the time I was the main commentator for the league, and Jack was kind of still an up and comer at that point. Like he'd been doing it for a little bit, but wasn't quite like the main guy per se. But his whole family was in attendance, and I remember he just looked at me. He's like, "Bro, can I please like have the final call? Like my family's here and I want to do it." And I was like, yeah, I don't care. Like if you want to do it, man, go
Go
ahead.
for it. Right.
He
Yeah.
jotted down some notes, and he absolutely crushed it. Yeah, that was a big one for me.
I gotta say the environment for sure. I was actually in the crowd during that moment, and it just felt different. Like whenever, and obviously with the storylines, but along with what you kind of entitled to when it comes to the casting side of things, but also kind of from the overall Call of Duty atmosphere. I mean, that was literally a new chapter kind of beginning post obviously Optic winning the championship that had kind of caused them so many problems kind of throughout their history. It was definitely kind of an odd and a surreal moment, and it definitely kind of felt like once we entered in the next season, it was like okay, new era now. It just kind of
Yeah,
felt that way in a number of different aspects, obviously from the
yeah.
player side and also clearly from the commentary side as well. Now, kind of transitioning a little bit to obviously our current circumstances, the way that things are currently rolling out. We got the Chicago home series coming up. Is there anyone that you can really make a case for, right? And when we talk about a lot of teams that are going to be in Chicago, a lot of top rosters that are going to be in attendance when it comes down to that event. The current front runner, obviously the number one team on many people's power rankings, and for obvious reasons, Atlanta. Any cases that you can make for teams outside of Atlanta coming into the Chicago home series and given the circumstances?
I think you can make a case for other teams, certainly, but anyone that doesn't have Phase as your favorite, it's insane. I don't think anything's happened or anyone has changed my mind that they're the best team in the game. The changed online doesn't change anything for me, as they're very solid there as well. I think that the one thing that might have given the edge to Chicago in some degree is if it was on land. Obviously, I think the fans in attendance, that would have been insane. Maybe a
Sure.
little bit of a home crowd, probably more than we've seen this year behind them. But that's obviously not going to be a thing. So no, Atlanta Phase is the favorite. No one can convince me otherwise. Now, does that mean they're going to win? No. We've seen all the upsets. We've seen Phase fall short in the semifinal. Chicago's now done it twice. There with this format, I know there are some people that wish it was double limb and whatever it might be, but with this format, it's created these exciting moments, these crazy upsets, and personally, I'm a fan of it. It's been nuts, and it just feels like nobody is safe at any moment. You have to play your best Call of Duty in that hour and a half span, or you could get torched by anybody. It's the most competitive league we've ever had, and yeah, anybody could win, but yeah, Phase are the favorite by far for me.
I almost want to make a case for Chicago in some ways, but I just really haven't been impressed with them at the two most recent events. I think we've kind of personally shared similar feelings about this team, kind of from an internal aspect. Do you think that Chicago, kind of from an internal aspect, stands firm for the rest of the season?
Well, my concerns the very beginning of the year, and the reason I didn't have them as the best team going in, despite all their talent, was my concerns. When you think about what happened with LG and Formal and Gunless kind of bumping heads, and we know Gunless can kind of I don't want to say like, go crazy with his teammates at times, but he can be very outspoken and kind of lose
Sure.
his cool a little bit. We know Formal and Scump have had their issues in the past, so my concern was if they came out flat to start the year and they ran into a bunch of losses and did perform up to fan expectations, that we could see this team fall apart and changes sooner than later. But they came in, they won their first event, and I was like, all right, well, that puts that to bed. They're playing really, really well. But now we're coming off what, back-to-back tournaments in which they get knocked out in a semifinal by Florida. Um, are we at the point yet where I'm convinced that there's going to be a change? No, we're not. I still feel like this will be your team for this foreseeable future. But if this continues for a couple more weeks, where they maybe get to a semifinal and fall short, I guess I feel like they're in need of a win. They're in need of a win, or
Mhm.
at least getting to a grand final, and the only team beating them is somebody like a Phase. If we have another tournament or two like this, yeah, I've got some concerns. Now, what would the change be? I honestly have no idea. But the benefit you have when you are NRG with Hector and Scump as your backing, you can basically get whoever you want most of the time. So that is why I guess the fear, nobody's really safe on that roster outside of Scump, really, I would say. So yeah, if they fall short a couple more times, I think maybe this conversation is maybe a little bit more valid. I'm not too worried yet, but it's been a rough stretch, right?
Yeah, it absolutely has. I'm kind of expressed my opinions a little bit on it. I'm kind of like the way that I've compared it is almost like a crack in the windshield. Like it's something that you're kind of aware of,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah,
not
that
something
makes
that you're
sense.
gonna instantly kind of get toward. But if you don't, address it, it could start to cause some problems. In terms of your opinions, top four teams are Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, and
We argued this on contesting the point, and Joe had to argue Rocker. I had to argue Mutineers, and I still feel like Mutineers. Joe's point was basically that Minnesota has been more consistent, in the sense that they don't have like those first round knockouts like you've seen with Florida. But they both been to two finals. Florida has a win, they don't, and they just beat them in the most recent grand final. I think if Florida didn't beat Rocker there, like if they didn't go 1 for 1 and I watched them play each other, I probably would be fine arguing Rocker. But I feel pretty comfortable right now with Florida, just because they just did it. They just won. You're only as good as your last tournament, and they beat Rocker to get there. But I think there are arguments to be made on both sides of that. I think they're the only two teams in the conversation to be there with Atlanta, Chicago, and Dallas. For me right now, though, I love what I saw with the Mutineers, and I guess there's a part of me that thinks yeah, Farrell played out of his mind, but has this team reached their true potential with him? They haven't really played that much with him yet. You feel
Right.
like they can only get better. And then if something, if Mox is playing poorly or if something's not clicking with the team, you have Pristini lying in wait that can maybe fill back in. So I feel good about Mutineers. We'll see. I could be crazy. They could get double first round at the next tournament. But for now, I feel good about it.
Do you think Florida has a chance of winning another championship this season?
They have a chance of winning another one? Sure. Yeah, why not? I think you could say that for God, 6 to 8 teams that have a chance to do it. I don't think that many are going to win.
I'll
But
say
when
this:
you
how likely? How likely do you think it is?
that they win another one?
Yeah.
God, I have to go look through it all and see what their first round matchups look like, what their groups look like. But
I'll say this: they are a little bit rough. I would say I think a majority of them they do have Atlanta in the tournament. They play in what I think are kind of the most difficult ones. They don't play in Chicago. The Minnesota one is hard, and the Toronto one is super difficult. There is one in London though, where I think it is solely Dallas, and then everyone else is kind of like current rosters that are struggling, like your Seattle's, your
yeah,
Paris and London. Not bad teams, but teams that you'd maybe kind of elevate them above. But that's just kind of from what I've experienced and kind of looking ahead at their schedule, the way that things sit.
I think they win one more this year.
Okay.
I can't give much more than that because I think there are 3 teams that are clearly better than them, but I think they're going to pull one more out this year. I do it. If it was just this one tournament win, maybe I wouldn't feel as confident in them winning another, but they also have another grand final. So it's not like they've only done
Right.
it once. Like they've made a couple runs. They're a team that maybe they'll be streaky and they get hot because everything kind of clicked this past weekend with pretty much everyone playing well, right? Like Havoc was like the number 2 slaying SMG. Skies led the way. Farrell was the number 1 flex. Like they kind of clicked everywhere. Right? It was sort of a perfect storm for their players in performing. I guess the reason that I feel like they can do it is because their hard point's been solid. Their dom has been incredible in places, but their search is still kind of ass. And
Yeah.
I just feel like their search is going to get better with the pieces that they have. It's not like when I look at Seattle and I have really major concerns about whether they can even get better at search. I feel like Florida can get better at search. If they get better at search, they're even more frightening.
That's for sure. Like I said, a lot of things to keep in mind when it comes down to Florida. But one other team that we've kind of honestly kind of shared similar opinions on is actually Optic LA, right? What do you think has kind of caused this team to take Dashy out of what is called the scrimmaging lineup, and then now it seems to kind of bring him back in? What do you think was the cause, maybe kind of on the back burner for that?
Have you heard anything official on that? Like, was it him? Was he in Canada? Was he unable to play? I haven't heard anything official on what was going on. I do know that there was a point where things weren't very good between like Slasher and Dashy. It's kind of the old school versus new school, and you know that Dashy and TJ have gotten flack in the past about maybe being lazy, not putting enough time into scrims, not taking it seriously enough, and we know that Slasher's kind of a drill sergeant from that regard and wants everything to be perfect and put all the time. So like I think there was a big clashing of the minds. And if I had to guess, I would say that Slasher probably wanted Dashy out and Dashy probably wanted Slasher out. Like, I don't think there's been a point where this has been very good internally for this team. I'm hoping they get to the point where they realize how good they can be and they can just
Yeah.
put that stuff to bed. I don't know. It's young people, and sometimes feelings and emotions get in the way of the bigger picture. That's what scares me. But I think we saw a glimpse in LA of what this team can do. I mean, they smoked Rocker. They could have beat Dallas. I mean, there were some maps they threw away there. I think they could vault into the top 3, top 4 if everything clicks. Like they have the talent to do it. But I guess it scares me because now we hear Dashy's back in the lineup, but the fact that there was even something going on there, even I don't know
Sure.
the full details, it's enough to tell me that it's not all good. It's not all good, which scares me.
Yeah, the way that I kind of looked at it was like, if there was something that wasn't to be concerned about, why not address it, right? If there's something minor, like, for example, the New York situation of bringing in, someone like Censor for a little bit of time, they addressed it. Hey, this is strictly for online. What was the case with OGLA? Like, if you don't have anything to hide, then why not release, that this is strictly for practice or strictly for online? A lot of details that I'm just not too sure
Yeah,
about, and I'm kind of worried. I'll be honest. I'm a little bit worried about the team internally, but like you mentioned, when it comes down to this roster, it is so scary the way that they can be. It's just a matter of can they get there or not.
100%. I think anyone that thinks otherwise is insane. Like they can be one of the best teams in the game. But the problem is like, yes, the internal stuff, but even like Chino doesn't fix the problem. Like one of their problems has been the AR issue of like Dashy is an AR, Slasher is an AR,
Yeah.
Chino is an AR. Like it doesn't really solve their comp problem. I guess we're gonna have to see what happens. I hope something clicks, man. I just wish I could lock them all in a room and just talk to them all and just tell them to stop being children and just take them through like a Dr. Phil type moment with old Dr. Maeve. But we'll see if they get past it. Time's running out. The good thing for them is it did sort of seem like it was starting to click at the last event, but now with the pandemic going on and all the delay and just being online scrims, which online scrims weren't going well for them for a while.
Right.
It's not like they got to carry that momentum over. I think if they had that LA event where they look strong and then they were able to hop right into another event, maybe we see them build upon it. But we didn't get that. You got like 2 months of no action. So I don't think that helps them at all.
What three players you think lead the way when it comes down to the MVP race? You got any front runners right now?
Um yeah, I guess when you just think about the top teams, I think if I was going to go with Huntsman, I'd probably take Envoy right now. With FaZe, I think you can make an argument for Simp or Celium based on the numbers they've been putting up. Those could be my top three, just because FaZe is still my number one team. But if I was going to take someone from another squad, I'd have difficulty pinpointing who on Empire I would take. To be honest, like there's no one that really stands out that I would put as like an MVP candidate right now. I think the person that probably jumps to my mind next is probably GodRx with Minnesota, just because I know a lot of the coaches and a lot of the players knew pretty early that they were going to be very strong, but I think from a fan perspective, I don't think the expectations were that this team was maybe going to be like a top four squad making the semifinals every single tournament. Like, I don't think that was what people thought. So I think they've just defied expectations to a degree. And I think GodRx has cemented himself as that guy that can go out and drop a 1.2 basically every game, which is very, very hard to do. We haven't had a lot of players in the history of Call of Duty esports that can do that consistently. And this is just a really good stretch for him. I mean, I picked him as my breakout player of the year this year because he only did it for final 2-3 months of last year when he really started to erupt and be a monster. And he's carried it right into this year. I mean, you just look at the last year of Call of Duty, it's been very good for GodRx. If he can keep it going the rest of the year and Minnesota can come away with a win somewhere in there, he's got a chance. But more than likely, I mean, realistic MVPs, it's probably between FaZe and Huntsman. I don't know how we're gonna do it. I don't even know. Like if we're gonna pick like a home series one at the end, like a kind of a regular season MVP and then a champs MVP. I don't actually know how it's gonna work. But yeah, I guess those would probably be my three.
And those are solid ones for sure. I think they are probably on my list as well when it comes down to the way that things have been shaping up. But of course, you can catch Maven casting the Call of Duty League Chicago home series this weekend, starting Friday, April 24th. Maeve, it was great. It was great catching up, man. We really appreciate you for coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm happy for you in this next step as you're working with Empire and everything going forward. You're fantastic, man. Thanks for having me on. If you ever need me to come on and talk about stuff, you know who to email. You can give me all. Hopefully they respond and you can get me on the show and we can chat all things CDL. But thanks for having me, pal.
That's Clint Maven Evans, CDL commentator, one of the nicest guys that you'll ever meet. Always great chatting with Maven. Great guy. Let's talk to him, and it's great to kind of hear his opinions when it comes down to things. And to be honest with you, we really have shared a lot of opinions on different things throughout the year. We both thought that at the kind of the start of the season that OGLA would be having some problems. We thought the same thing kind of with the Chicago Huntsman as well. But regardless, let's get down to it, right? All right, let's kind of get to the nitty gritty. Who is winning this bad boy? I mean, who is winning the Chicago home series? Because we need to be realistic. We've got 3 teams that have won already this season. Coming into this event, we have all circled the Chicago home series on our calendars since we all saw who was going to be there, right? Dallas, Chicago, Atlanta, which now begs the question, who wins their second title first, right? Who will be the first 2-time CDL champion? Now, I really want to take a look at each team's journey, if you will, through the bracket, because each team is going to have different challenges, different teams, even some of them are going to have different pools with one another. So let's go ahead and take a look at Atlanta FaZe first. Speaking of number ones, that's where they sit in the power rankings as well. However, they have yet to play online. They're currently 8-1 when it comes down to the standings. Their only loss comes from the Minnesota Rocker when they lost 3-2 in LA, preventing them from making it to the finals. They come into a very difficult group, right? One that includes Chicago, New York, and London. They'll face off against the Ravens in round one, a roster that has apparently looked better online, and they seem to be performing much better with Shawnee in the lineup. I think the Ravens can look better, but you really can't go against Atlanta in this position. And the next round, FaZe will have to play either New York or Chicago, regardless of who they play. I like them in that matchup versus both of these teams based on the way that this team's composition really works as well. Obviously, it's going to be a fun one to see if they do face off against the Chicago Huntsman, a series that has been hyped up forever. It should be a fun one, like I said, if those two teams do end up matching up. So once FaZe get through the grueling Group A, they'll then play the second seed coming in from Group B. That most likely, right, being one of these three teams, well, most likely, but it should be one of these three teams being Seattle, the Gorillas, or the LA Optic. If you're FaZe and you make it out of groups, you're a shoo-in for finals. I mean, let's be real here. I like FaZe's road when it comes down to the bracket, right? They win the matches they're supposed to, and they should be a lock to make it into the grand finals. I mean, I think you have to pick them versus Optic. You have to pick them versus Gorillas. You have to pick them versus Seattle. It's only the way it works. You make it through your difficult group, and you're good for the bracket stage. You should be in the finals, and we'll see how they play when it comes down to that. All right, next team that's already won, right? We talked about it. Look at the Dallas Empire. Currently number 3 in my power rankings. Suffered a top 4 finish in Dallas, losing 3-1 to the Minnesota Rocker. They're 9-6 on the year. That's 3 losses to Chicago, 2 losses to Atlanta, 1 loss to Minnesota. Despite the losses, they have lost to good teams. A totally different story than Atlanta, though, right? A much easier group, a very similar to the Dallas home series, actually. For those that do remember their group stage, the last time around, the Empire had to face off against Florida, Gorillas, and Toronto. This time, they have Seattle, Gorillas, and OGLA. Let's be real here. This is a major opportunity for the Empire, right? They should have won in Dallas. I'll be the one to say it. They should have been the ones to win. They should have at least been in the grand finals. I heard the internet complaints from them, right? Whoever you put the blame on with now the fact that we kind of have the dedicated server vetoes, we'll see how that kind of plays out. But regardless of who you put the blame on, they should have at least been in the grand finals at their home series. And I think that they should be in the grand finals here. They should have no major issues getting out of their group. OGLA is a wild card, granted, but they're off another role change. You win that, and you have to face off against LAG, a team you beat, granted in a close series, but a team you beat in Dallas, right? Or Seattle, a roster that you're currently 2-0 against on the year, beating them 3-0 and 3-1 in London. Dallas on the year is currently 4-0 collectively versus all the teams in their pool, right? They 3-0'd Seattle and OGLA once, and they 3-1 Seattle and the Gorillas. If they make it out of their pool, which they shouldn't really have to worry about all that much, the one thing they don't have to worry about either is Atlanta, right? The team they need to be conscious of is a team that they've faced off against 3 different times now. That being the Chicago Huntsman, right? A roster that they are currently 0-3 against, a team that they haven't faced off, though, against since CDL London over 2.5 months ago. It's been some time. The trend throughout those particular series, if we kind of look back at the details of Dallas versus Chicago, what exactly occurred, right? For them to go 0-3, what was the big deal that really happened in those? The big deal for me, game 1. Always went to Chicago. In fact, not only game 1 has been good for them, but it's also been game 4. So much so that Chicago have yet to drop a hard point versus Dallas in the 3 times that they've matched up. Another big trend, the game 2 search and destroy, right? Dallas wins it at launch weekend, and the other 2 series when they matched up in London, the Huntsmen managed to take both of those S&Ds in round 11, and that was a hot team when it came down to search and destroy in London as well. We move over to the DOMs that have taken place. Chicago has dominated Dallas twice. Dallas has dominated Chicago once, and that was one time where they managed to push the series, obviously, into that 3-1. If they can improve on hardpoint, we're talking about Dallas. If they can improve on hardpoint and close out search and destroys the way that they have throughout a majority of the year, they should be in a much better spot. If they can take down the Huntsman, they're most likely looking at FaZe in the grand finals. Finally, we're going to take a look at the Chicago Huntsman, right? Where do they sit? What's their tournament looking like? They currently are number 2 in my power rankings. I'll be honest, I wanted to put them lower. Regardless, they currently sit first in the CDL standings. They finished top 4 in the past 2 events they've competed at in both Atlanta and Dallas. Much like FaZe, a difficult group, right? The Huntsmen have to worry about a New York roster that has looked much better in scrims, with someone like Mac Meltz coming in for the first time, a guy that I said has to be on your top 5 players to watch coming into the online league. The hype about this guy I've heard is real. I've heard that it's legit. And that's one of the main reasons why I'm super excited to watch New York, is obviously because their first matchup, when you have a guy like Mac, who apparently has invigorated this team, first game is going to be against the Huntsmen. It's a lot of pressure, but I'm very excited to watch this guy. Like I said, I've heard very good and consistent things about this guy to make me think that should be a good player, should be a good team. This team should improve from that. That's something that they also have to worry about. If they look good in face off in the rather, I'll say this: if they look good versus New York, then they have to worry about the one series that everyone has been waiting on since the start of the season. As I mentioned it earlier, the match versus Atlanta FaZe. Needless to say, I haven't liked the way that Chicago have looked. We talked about them at the top of the show. I don't like these early matchups for them because they need to come out better. You may face off against a sleeper New York team. If you take them down, then there's Atlanta. And the big thing for me as well, you have to keep in mind that while this roster only has lost to Florida, if they make it out of this group in the 2nd seed, which is probably and mostly predicted, the problem is that they'll also see Dallas in round 1. That is a big detail to think about. That is a big series that could, in fact, happen for them. A series that we just broke down a moment ago, right? They're currently 3-0 versus Dallas, but this Chicago has been different than the one that we saw in London, right? The series, map by maps, have gotten closer. If they go through Dallas, they'll most likely have to worry about Atlanta on the other side. It is arguably the hardest road that out of all 3 of these teams, that Chicago is the hardest one out of the 3. They have the hardest road when it comes down to their own home series. Out of Dallas, out of FaZe, Chicago by far has the hardest road. So who wins this? Right, we've broke down 3 different teams. We've talked about both, or rather all 3 of their scenarios, even though 2 of them are in the same group in comparison to Dallas. Do we go with Chicago, right? Given the difficult run, granted, it is their homestand. They do have roles now kind of back to the way they're supposed to be. Formal now on the main AR, Arcitys back to a flex. Are they going to improve for their homestand? Do we give it to the favorites in Atlanta, right? This is their first online tournament. They do have a difficult group that could get caught off guard by someone like the London Royal Ravens. Chicago could give them a good series, yet they're still also number 1 in everyone's power rankings. Lastly, Dallas Empire, a tournament that I think that they will and need to do well in and have a great chance to do so given the results that we've seen out of them recently. 3 choices. And I'll be honest, I've gone a little bit back and forth. I've tried to be different, but this one is an easy choice. And it should be an easy choice for you as well. It's Atlanta FaZe. The biggest thing for me is that I don't think that rust is really going to affect this group all that much. At the start of the season, I mentioned this is a team that won the offseason. Major reason is that I think that they have great pieces for the future. The most impressive thing to me is by how great they have looked already. Right? The teams have to worry about this particular team for years to come. That is the biggest problem for other rosters, is that they have matured earlier than expected. They have bloomed earlier than teams thought they would. The way that the phrase that I've been using since the season started, innocent until proven otherwise. They've lost once. That being to Minnesota. Is Minnesota here? No. Don't have to worry about Minnesota. Team's not here. They're not playing in the Chicago home series. This is a mature group, folks. Despite being a young team, they actually take their profession seriously. which is kind of surprising. I think the coaching staff is prepared. I think they're focused more than many other teams are right now. They take scrim seriously, they take events seriously. And coming into this event, they want to take this from Chicago. They had a chance to watch everybody play. And I think they're coming into a difficult group, but I still think they're looking focused and they're prepared, especially when it comes down to the vetoes. That is the way that I piece it together. A lot of times you'd look at a young roster and think about all the little problems that could exist. Oh, the communication problems, right? The idea of egos becoming a problem, which I think is still possible down the line. But still, yet this doesn't affect this team. It has not affected this team. And it's so hard to pick away from the Atlanta phase because they haven't really given you a reason to not like them. They haven't given you a reason to say, oh, there's no way that FaZe can overcome this problem or overcome this particular issue. The only thing that Atlanta FaZe has done to make you think, well, they could lose this event is based on the way that a team has managed to, in some ways, figure them out. That being the Minnesota Rocker, and it took a game 5 to get it done. It took two different instances, two different matchups, and arguably versus one of the most well-prepared teams in the CDL. That's what it took, and so far, it has happened once. To be honest with you, I think they'll face off against Dallas in the grand finals. I will. I'm not a big fan of Chicago right now. Coming into the way that they have looked, I'll be posting some bracket predictions either tonight or in the morning ahead of the event starting. But sneak peek, not a fan of Chicago right now. I'm really not. I'm not a fan of the way that they've looked, and I'm not a fan of the way that they've played. I think they're going to get caught off guard when it comes down to this event. Facing off against a lot of top caliber rosters, they're going to have some top teams to worry about. But I think especially with Dallas, the main thing that I heard from them was the issue of servers, right? Playing teams on their preferred hosts. Now that we do have the dedicated server veto, it's awesome. For those that haven't heard about it, feel free to check out the COD League. I think it was COD Gamepedia who tweeted out an article that the COD League had obviously released recently, talk about the new dedicated server veto, meaning they have 9 servers now scattered across the United States, and that teams will have the chance to kind of privately veto one server they don't want to have to worry about, and that should drastically help things. I think last week, or I should say last event, teams are kind of caught off guard. I think the CDL was kind of thrown into this thing of like, hey, how do we handle these servers? And there were obviously teams that received the negatives from them. I got to hear from Dallas about it. I've heard from a few other teams they weren't a big fan. It was kind of split down the middle, but just in general, given the results, I'm going with Atlanta. I think they beat Dallas in the grand finals. That's where I sit. But I would love to see where everyone else sits. I know I'm going against the grain. Where are you at with your predictions right now? I want to see what everyone's thoughts are. Feel free to let us know on Twitter. Tweet at me at Lando. Feel free to use the hashtag off the break. I want to see your predictions. Let me know who you have in the finals, who you have coming out of groups. Do you think that it can be Chicago? Do you think that Dallas has the opportunity to do it, or are you sticking on the regular train when it comes to FaZe? I know I'm going with kind of a more of a standard pick. I think it's a safe one. It's one that I honestly think is going to happen. But I'm interested. I'm interested to hear what everyone else has to think. But like I said, feel free to use that hashtag, looking at it all the time, and I would love to reference any questions, anything that anyone has when it comes down to good old social media. Massive thank you to everybody for tuning in for today's episode. Thank you again to all of our listeners on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, as well as to everybody who is currently watching us live. You can catch Off the Break every Tuesday and every Thursday at 6 p.m. Central, as well as 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Apologies for missing on Tuesday. That was a problem regarding internet for me. That just whatever reason problems are occurring. So my fault for that. I'll take the dive for it as rightfully so. But like I said, we had a great conversation today. We talked about Arcitys, his comments on the Huntsman, that kind of reassuring the things that I have talked about this team, kind of my worry coming into what is their own home series. We had a great conversation with Maven, talking everything about the CDL. Always great to kind of hear his insight, especially when it comes down to the commentary side of things, because I obviously find that very fascinating from my background coming in from a broadcasting standpoint. But it was great to hear his insight on that stuff. And we as well talked about who do we think will be the first 2-time CDL champion. I'm thinking it's FaZe, and I'm looking forward to seeing what everyone else thinks as well. Probably a lot on the FaZe train, but hey, you never know, right? We could see surprises. We saw surprises last event. Could it happen now? It should be an awesome time this weekend over in Chicago. Make sure to tune into the Chicago home series starting this Friday, April 24th, and it's going to be starting at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you soon for a recap of everything that took place. Enjoy the event. Have a great weekend. And thank you so much for joining us here on Off the Break.